Hello, welcome to Radio Row at Super Bowl 56 in Los Angeles with Caleb Branham. I'm Roy Kessel for Sports Philanthropy Network, and we're very excited to have with us today Joanne Pasternak. Joanne has a long history of doing work in the community with the 49ers Foundation and with so many other organizations. Joanne, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Roy. Excited to be here.
We're so glad that you were able to join us. I know that you are now working, you have your own company in Oliver and Rose, but you have such a long track record of working in this space of philanthropy and community work and sports for good. Take us a little bit through your history and how you developed that passion, because we're always interested in hearing why somebody chose to go into this aspect of sports, which when you started was not nearly as developed in an area of field as it is now.
Well, first, you make it sound like I'm about 117 years old, but no, there's been so much development in this space around corporate social responsibility. I'll take you back many, many years. My love for this space first came from volunteer work I did with Special Olympics when I was 14, and I saw the power of sports to really create connections and make a difference and to break down those barriers. So I was a competitive figure skater growing up. Was getting to that age and that stage where you start to lose your interest in the things that you've always loved as a child and you're becoming a teenager. And my coach saw that in me, and she invited me to start coaching at this Special Olympics program that took place after my Saturday morning sessions. And so I showed up, and it created a lifelong commitment to the movement. But after that, going off to college, to law school, I knew that I wanted to make a difference, but I didn't know how until I realized that the ability to have the articulation for those who may not have the voices that are being heard and to bring them into a place in a space where they can amplify their voices meant that we could enable and empower athletes and others to learn from each other and to teach the kids who are coming up behind them. Whether we like it or not, athletes are role models. So if they're role models, we might as well seize the moment and bring them into the fold so that we can help people to learn from them. So I spent 9 seasons with the San Francisco 49ers, spent back-to-back championship seasons with the Golden State Warriors, then went off to a company called Stated, where I created a strategic plan around global impact, and then launched my own firm 2 years ago. It's been just over 2 years. I work exclusively with athletes, teams, leagues, but marrying them to brands and to philanthropic efforts to bring them together to create maximized impact.
So in all of those capacities, I think one of the things that you've done really well is, as you said, bringing the brands together with the foundations and the causes. Given that your background is in law, right, and that's what you study, how did you get that passion for marketing and sort of bringing and developing the philanthropic side of things?
It's interesting because we all have something that we care deeply about, and when you can dig deep enough, figure out how to speak about that with people, elevate the conversation around it, it's really powerful. So, law school is about avoiding math first and foremost, but it's also about learning how to read critically and how to take the most important components of anything and to deliver those out in a way that's compelling. So applying that same philosophy to the world of philanthropy means that we're just looking at the totality of the circumstances, if I'm using legal terms here, the totality of circumstances, and gleaning from that the elements that we think will be most connective, most persuasive, and will leave a lasting impact. So it's the same philosophy I apply to the philanthropic work I do. But I also dig deeper than that. I look at it and I say, who are you? What is the cause that most resonates with you? How do we elevate that component of who you are and tell a story? And which brands and which nonprofit organizations would best align with that? And that's where we find the magic. We bring them together.
So I know that you mentioned your work with Special Olympics, which is a cause that's near to my heart and a cause Kayla cares about immensely. I'll let her jump in a minute, but my younger sister Sharon is developmentally disabled and was involved in Special Olympics from a very early age and loved that, and it gave her such a thrill and opportunity to participate and compete in a way that she wouldn't have been able to. And I know Kayla's got a lot involved with her podcast.
Yeah, thank I agree. Special Olympics is a great charity. Every athlete on Legacy After the Locker Room makes an autograph donation for Special Olympics, and I'm so grateful. But Joanne, my thing is, whatever you're passionate about, right? Like, let's ask the athlete, what causes do you care about? There's so much work to be done in this world. I can find a charity around what you're interested in. But I think the issue is, teaching people, and it's really teaching. It's just putting it out there to live generously. We live in a very selfish world. So I guess my question for you is, when you're working with an athlete or a team or a league or a governing body, how are you sort of asking those questions and really listening to their story to create the right foundation to maximize the impact?
Well, you have to love people. I mean, that's the first thing. You have to love people. You have to actually listen to them. We do so much talking, and it's interesting. Just today, I was sharing with one of my clients that feeling when you text somebody or email them or call them and say, I'm going through this thing, and they immediately jump in to share what they're going through. That moment is not the solidarity that comes from knowing that you've been through it, the similar things, but it's that opportunity to say, this is my story at this moment. So again, it's I look at it primarily as who am I? What is unique about me? Why am I looking at this particular topic versus any other topic? But that specificity is really important. The authenticity behind that. It's also in your encouraging subject matter knowledge, so that if you want to advocate around intellectual disabilities, know what it means to say, sorry, one of my good friends is over there and he's waving at me, and there's Vernon Davis. So when you're advocating in that way, then you're pulling it into your heart. In fact, I'm going to use Vernon as an example because he's a terrific example of an athlete who had a passion that wasn't being tapped into for his philanthropic efforts. So Vernon was a studio art major at the University of Maryland. He loves art, and when he was stressed out or when he needed to find a little headspace, he would go to his studio at his home and paint. Even as a child, he would find a quiet space and paint. And so when he was creating his foundation, we focused in on that love of art and what the love of art could mean within the community where he was raised in Washington, D.C. So by connecting those two causes, by elevating something that he loved and then giving him a philanthropic outlet to be able to do something with it, now we have something that really resonates. And when we're looking at sponsorship opportunities, let's say that we're partnering with an apparel company and they'd like to have Vernon use his love of art to develop something that will show his branding, but also show his passion for art. And hopefully that'll inspire kids who might think that art is not something they should be in because they're athletic. So that's the way we do it, and it works really well.
I want to jump in on that because you touched on a really important point. As Kayla and I have gone and spoken to lots of different teams, we get a wide range of responses in how affirmatively the teams make an effort to engage the players and really draw out what is the player's interest compared to just show up here for a signing or a photo op. In your work at Golden State and with the 49ers, talk a little bit about how you handled that process with the players.
Well, I liken it to Mad Libs. I don't know if either of you have ever played Mad Libs or you played it with your kids. But my mom's a librarian, so we played word games. That was our version of fun. But we used to play Mad Libs a lot. You know how it works. Like you flip it over, you don't have any context, but you're asked to fill in a proper noun, a verb, an adverb, an adjective, whatever, part of it's proper noun. So you're putting these together, and then when you scribble them into the Mad Libs side, on the other side where it actually goes in the story, it makes no sense. So now you're talking about a hot pepper sauce walked down the street with a purple raincoat, and like, why? I felt like we were doing the same thing with athletes. We were saying we have 10 events, we have 53 athletes, we're going to put them into slots. and say, okay, these 5 guys are going to go and do this thing at the hospital, and these 5 at the homeless shelter. And it wasn't always a fit. So then you have guys who are at the event, but they aren't necessarily feeling the moment. If instead we went and we had a very simple survey that we took in the locker room right as the season was starting, right after cuts and final roster was set, and they would just check boxes. Are you affiliated with, or have you had influence from the Boys and Girls Club? Are you affiliated with, or have you been affected by breast cancer in some way? So those types of engagements were how we developed authenticity. And with that, we increased player engagement from 62% to 100%, which was huge. So 100% of the players were involved in philanthropic efforts without being obligated to do so.
And I think that's really important when you look at what goes on.
Here, wait.
Oh, here we go. Got a special guest jumping in here.
Wait.
You're going to say hi?
Hold on. I was just talking about you, Bridget.
Grab a chair.
No,
Grab a
I
chair.
know he has to go.
Yeah, we gotta run and do some
But
stuff.
I was just talking about
Say
you.
hi,
You like
Brian
art?
What's up?
Davis,
We were just talking about art.
Sports Philanthropy Network.
That's what I was talking about. How do you find your philanthropic passion?
How do you find that passion?
Look, I find it through just like through life, right? You go through life and you have these ups and downs, the ebb and flows of life, right? And I just take what I feel from deep down inside and I put it out on the canvas. But now I've been putting it out in music, I put it out in my films, my shows.
And you were nominated for the Walter Payton Man of the Year when you played for the Niners because of the work you were doing in the inner city communities around art. Your
Yes.
scholarships and community, right?
Yep, absolutely.
That's what passion's about.
Well, thank you for stopping in and saying hi.
Right here.
We appreciate all your efforts and the great work you do in the community. It means a lot to Sports Philanthropy Network, and you're a great role model for a lot of people out there
Thank
trying
you
to
so
develop
much.
their causes.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys.
I'll just say this
Thank
real
you.
quick.
Good to see you.
All right.
Milwaukee
Milwaukee.
appreciates it. Milwaukee appreciates it.
Take care. All
Thank
right.
you. Thank you.
That was good timing.
That was perfect.
Well, and I think that really hits on the genuine nature of people making that decision as opposed to being assigned, hey, you're going to go to this one of 5 causes and we're just putting you on a bus to go somewhere, when they really get the stake and they're invested in this is my passion. You can't fake that type of passion.
No, and it's also, I mean, that was an accidental bumping into, but it's a genuine love and affection for each other, and it goes both ways. So I'm not pigeonholing an athlete into a category that I think they belong in. I actually really do care about what they care about and finding the right fit. So when you think about athlete loyalty to causes, that's another important thing. If you are a nonprofit organization and you'd like to have an athlete involved with your work, calling up the person who runs community relations or has the role that I had at the 49ers and the Golden State Warriors and saying, I'd like this top player or this top player to show up at my event, is actually dehumanizing that player a bit. If instead you said, either if you knew something about backgrounds of the players, or if you said, I'd love to talk to one of your athletes who loves art, who finds great passion through that. And we're a charity that's using art to support mental health. So now you're asking me, as the person who has the understanding of what the athletes like to do, who I would recommend. And as a result, I'm now able to funnel you to somebody who may form a lifelong attachment to that cause. Special Olympics is a great example of that too, but any cause. The other thing, this is really important, I discourage athletes from creating their own 501c3s. So put on my lawyer hat for a moment. There are a million nonprofits. The administrative overhead that goes into nonprofits in order to keep them in a sustainable fashion, to make sure they're legally compliant. I'm not saying they're athletes aren't capable, they absolutely are, but what they do best is amplify the very well thought out, reasoned, established, concentrated effort around a topic that the athlete may not have. So they are much more valuable lending their voice to a cause that's existing but is under-resourced than they would be if they independently created something. Like an example would be if an athlete wanted to create a nonprofit to support literacy. Well, that's great, but Room to Read exists and National Scholastic Foundation exists. And we had Joe Staley on the Niners, and when his mother's also a librarian, and when he stood up and started to do work around National Scholastic Foundation, it was a game changer. So that's how we like to bring these together. And hopefully people find not only their voice and their passion, but also a bridge from a mental health perspective, so that when their playing years are over, they already have something where they have tested and learned about public speaking, about building out a business development plan, working with partners, showing up on time, doing all things that you really don't have a chance to do when you're a collegiate athlete and a professional athlete. And then all of a sudden you retire, expected to go know all these grown-up skills. I think through philanthropy, we can help them to gracefully transition and cross that bridge.
I think what you said is critical in terms of not forming your own 501c3 just for the sake of it. Having been an agent, I'll place a large blame on the agent community of advising their clients that they need to have their own nonprofit in order to do marketing deals or appearances or things like that. And as you said, too frequently, there's no real plan, no real effort put into how to create a long-term program. They create the 501c3s to run a golf outing, to have a dinner, and they think that that's the be-all and end-all of the nonprofit, as opposed to a means to raise money for a particular cause. And so amplifying that cause is so important. And as you said, there are causes that are already doing the work that they're passionate about. And so helping those organizations do it can really provide a big boost. So I love that message.
Well, and it's also taking it one step further. I launched a program called Athletes Voices, which you can check out at athletesvoices.org. But it's about creating playbooks for athletes from all different sports, whether you're a Paralympic fencer or you're a former NFLer. It really doesn't matter. We're going to help you develop a strategy to be able to amplify your voice. The other thing is I encourage nonprofits and individuals who are doing fundraising, don't go to the athlete and ask them to make a donation. They will when they're feeling in the moment, when they can do so much more by coming in and lending a bit of their influencer status or providing auction items and other things. So be creative in what you're asking for, but also let them lead the way and ask them to come up with how they'd like to best contribute to that particular event.
Yeah, I think when you talk about the athletes being asked for money, right? They're getting asked from so many directions, and I think one of the challenges is how do you create an environment where the athletes feel valued and develop that relationship. We've had quite a number of athletes through here this week that have talked about the difficulty of that transition when their career is done and the importance of doing that. And I know Kayla can talk about that a little bit in terms of her podcast and Legacy After the Locker Room and how so many of those athletes have really gone through that transition, some more easily than others.
Yeah, thank you, Roy. And I know we're just out of time, so I'll just touch on that briefly. But Joanne, Roy, as you know, athletes have dedicated their entire lives for some of these guys here this week since Pop Warner. And we add to that the number of concussions they've had, the mental health issues that they've had playing in the leagues, along with now my career is over and what's next? So a lot of times what I find in speaking with them and just listening to their story, and I think that's something that we in the media sometimes make a mistake on, is we want to tell the story instead of we want to ask for the story. So that's something that I think really needs to change, and I think that tide is shifting. But as we hear these athletes' stories, whatever they are, whether they're abuse, whether they're my wife had cancer, whatever it is, as they share their stories, oftentimes in my experience, I'm moved to tears or laughter or anger or so many emotions, but the work that they actually did as professional athletes is minute in comparison to the big work they're doing after their career ends. So Joanne, I know you get it.
Couldn't agree more. But I want to double down on that a little bit. We have to remember also that their stories are uniquely their stories. And so when we are telling those stories, let's allow them to humanize it as opposed to, or this is somebody who rose up above. how many times have you heard the same version or the different versions of the same story told, when really we know that it's multifaceted, it's a layered existence. And making sure that when we tell a hero story, that we're identifying that the real hero is the athlete at the center who found that inner strength to get up and go and get past whatever it was that may have been holding them back. But let's let them tell their stories, and then let's help them to find the causes that are most aligned with that, and just propel them forward. And you see the smiles, you see the pride, you see the fact that they're feeling like they are really valued for something other than what they did on the field or the pitch or the court or wherever it is that they did their sport. I'd also encourage people to think outside of the obvious individuals for each of the causes, and to look deeper. So I work with the Women's National Football Conference. These women are unbelievable football players, tackle football, but they're also unbelievable storytellers. They have a unique background. They're coming into this sport because they love it, and not because they want to play with the boys or they want to play against the boys, but because they want to be known for what they do best. But when we're trying to tell stories about resiliency, let's look to our Paralympic athletes. Let's look at our WNFC, WNBA. The guy who won the award for most inspirational moment last night at NFL Honors was a kicker who kicked the longest field goal in history, right? And so he's an inspiring leader because he stood there. And I never have any idea how a kicker does what he does, because the presence of mind and the ability to shudder out that noise, to be able to do that, that's a story we should be telling. So I encourage people to look outside and figure out where the great stories are and find ways for us to elevate that as well.
Kil, I know you had a chance to talk to Zion a couple of days ago, and I think he's a perfect fit for that type of situation, and I'd love to have you share your conversation with him.
Well, it was just so nice to hear Zion speak, because he got it right from the beginning, and he said a big part of it was from mentorship. And from my perspective, it comes down to really two things. One is having a great mentor, and the other is removing your own bias. And Diane Billings-Buford was on a couple of days ago with Rise, just addressing the bias that we have, and we see it. We're here on Radio Row, and we had Jimmy Gardner earlier this morning, who spent 27 years in prison before being exonerated as a minor league baseball player. But he was here, and frankly, because he's Black, people assumed he was NFL alumni. He could have been media, he could have been a reporter, could have been 100 different things, but we need to address that. Because somebody is a certain color does not mean they played in the NFL. Because somebody is tall does not mean they played in the NBA. Because somebody is a certain brown or black or any other color does not mean they grew up poor and God saved them and brought them out of the inner city to play sports. We have biases that we need to address, and we need strong mentors to do it.
Agree, but also, Kayla, around that, we can't assume that the issue that seems obvious on the surface is the one that the athlete wants to address. So I work with a woman. She's an incredible advocate, mentor, all the things. She was a silver medalist in sailing. She represented Great Britain, but deeper within her story, she's a Paralympic athlete, Alexandra Rickham. She was growing up in Jamaica, ended up having an injury, which resulted in her being a tetraplegic. But her passion is around the environment and around the health of our oceans, because her happy place is on the ocean, in a sailboat, on the water. And so if you go to Alexandra and you automatically assume that her issue is going to be the fact that she is a tetraplegic, then you're doing her a disservice. You're making an assumption. It's the same thing when people walk up to me and say, I'm Irish too. And I'm like, I'm Russian Jewish, so I have no Irish in me, but thank you for coming up and making an assumption because I have red hair. We don't know who people are. They are not unidimensional. But if Alexandra can speak so incredibly and persuasively about environmental degradation and remediation, then that's exactly what she should be talking about. And that's really the end of it. Your story is your story to tell.
And we see that every year, Joanne, at Sports Philanthropy World, when we put our panels together, right? You can put the topic of the panel in place, and yet what somebody wants to talk about doesn't necessarily fit check boxes based on their demographic, based on their race, religion, anything else. And so I really value that. I think it's something that we try and be very careful of and make sure that we get a balance, because you want all, as you have, athletes' voices, all different types of voices, and you don't want all the voices coming from the exact same community.
Right. I mean, if you're talking about mental health, get different perspectives. If you're talking about cancer and what it means to be a survivor, what does it mean to be a child of somebody who didn't survive? You know, there are so many, every story has many different angles. So anyway, obviously I am very passionate about this topic. I could talk about it. Well, I do talk about it all day, every day. My work, my life, it all blends together. But, you know, as a mom, I know that I want my children to be appreciated for who they are and what they bring to the universe. But I also want them to be able to see strong women, strong people with intellectual disabilities, strong people just in general who are digging deep and finding something within themselves. And Kayla, going back to Special Olympics for one moment, I skipped over in my bio. I worked for Special Olympics, their global headquarters, right out of law school. And I was doing an event that was up at Sesame Street, and we were filming a series of videos about young athletes and getting them involved in sport. And I asked this mother whose daughter was appearing in these PSAs how she got involved with Special Olympics. You know, it was just small talk. She looks at me and she goes, you know, when Katie was born, everybody kept telling us what she could never do and what she'd never do and how difficult it would be for our family. But what they forgot to tell us was how much of a blessing she'd be. Special Olympics was the first organization that came to the table and said, oh my gosh, listen to all the things that Katie can do, all the things she can participate in. And it lifted us up. And so that's another thing. It's make sure that the sympathetic story is the right one, and that you're also looking and saying, what is it that we can all learn from this moment about providing people with the upside versus the downside? And when I think about Zion, for example, I look at him and I'm like, my goodness, he's a compelling speaker. He is incredibly passionate about what he talks about. He's an inspiration, but let's not stop at that. He's an inspiration because of who he is and what he brings to the table. And then he happens to also be phenomenally talented at wrestling, which is terrific. But it's the balance of all of those. And that's another important thing. It's, are we segmenting people? And also, when you think about Special Olympics and other entities like that, how are we lifting up the whole family by highlighting not just what Special Olympics meant to Katie, but what does Special Olympics mean to her parents and to her siblings, and how did they find a place and a voice and destigmatize something that should never be stigmatized to begin with?
I think that's so important, because you talk about focusing on what people can do and instead of what they can't do. And I think that's true not only for individuals with disabilities, for all of us when we look around and see what's going on in the world. Like there's all of us have things that we're better at and other things that we struggle with, and we need to recognize what's going on. So Joanne, I want to thank you so much for joining us here today. We really appreciate your insight, your leadership, and your involvement in so many different areas. Every time I turn around and see a good program, your name's on the list of those people leading that charge. So thank you for everything you bring to the community. I'm going to let Kayla sign off.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Appreciate being on the show, and appreciate the work you do. And you will see me at Sports Philanthropy World, I'm sure, this year. So I don't have my invitation yet, but I'll take a yes.
Well, we're trying to figure out if it's going to be live or virtual. We're hoping we can keep it live this year.
I know. I mean, we're almost back to normal, but as we return to some new normal, I think it's important for us to all kind of hug each other a little bit, even if it's virtually, and remind each other that we have our backs. We're seeing your guys and mental health issues, and our children have been gravely affected. So sports brings people back together. Sports brings people joy. It helps you to release negative energy, and so I'm here for all of it. Thank you guys for having me on today.
You're welcome, Joanne. On behalf of Roy Kessel and myself, we're reminding you to live generously.